This is my audience. Since the late 1900s, almost 2,000 people have been executed from the death penalty. My name is Lydia Elson. I have been interested in the death penalty for many years and have decided to take further research into it. Many people believe that the death penalty makes violent criminals suffer by knowing that they are going to die. However, killing them releases the pain that they have. The death penalty has very many problems with it. Back in the days, people were tortured. They were put on machines that would kill them in a painful way. However, that's not what it is today. Instead, people are killed by lethal injection, which is an injection shot with drugs in it that make them die peacefully. The problem with this is that it is also expensive. In 2011, on the Loyola of Los Angeles Law Review article, Judge Arthur Alarcon and law professor Paula Mitchell state California taxpayers have spent roughly $4 billion to fund a dysfunctional death penalty system that has carried no more than 13 executions. This is a very small number compared to how much the death penalty really costs, and we are paying with that from our tax money. There is also no going back when killing someone. There has been multiple cases where people are sentenced to death and, die, and are later found out that they were innocent and lost their entire life for no reason. And but if they were in prison and eventually found innocent, they at least have a couple of years left to live. Executions are also for very extreme cases. It's murderers, very violent murderers, pedophiles, rapists that are getting put on the death penalty. It's not just a misdemeanor. And these people, when they get put into prison, the other prisoners do not like them and often beat them up and other things. So these violent prisoners who are put on death row would almost always rather die than continue being in prison. However, many disagree with this. People who support the death penalty often think that it stops the criminal from continuing to do more crime. However, again, when people are put into prison and put on death row, it's for a very violent crime. They're not getting out anytime soon. They're either dying or they're in prison for the rest of their lives. So it's not like they could commit any more crimes. There is also people who like the death penalty for revenge. So, for example, if a murderer killed a mom's child, she would want revenge on the murderer. Also, a lot of people do not like paying taxes to keep prisoners in jail and pay for shelter, food, water, all of this stuff. Generally, these seem like good reasons. However, there is a couple of issues behind them. So these murderers are going to be in prison for life, and they're not going to get out to commit more crimes. In 2005, on the Behavioral Sciences and the Law article, forensic psychologist Mark Cunningham writes, death sentenced inmates typically serve between sentencing and relief or execution. Hence relief or execution. Execution is a relief. They are not going to get out. Revenge is also very understandable. I too would, be upset if someone killed a loved one of mine. However, the death penalty nowadays isn't torture. Can you move that really quick? Sorry. The death penalty isn't torture. Instead, it's a non-painful death. They're not suffering in any way. They are simply just dying and being put out of their pain. In 2014, in the Time.com article, Eliana Doctorman writes, Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam signed a bill into law allowing the use of electrical chair for death row inmates when lethal injection isn't available. Electric chair wasn't even legal until the governor signed it into law. There's no other way of doing it other than lethal injection, which, again, is not painful. Not wanting to pay taxes on these violent criminals, is something I don't want to do either. However, the issue is that the death penalty costs a lot more money than it does for a life sentence. In 2011, in the Atlantic monthly newspaper, writer Mary Fisher says, since 1978, California has spent more than $4 billion on only 13 executions, or roughly $308 million per execution. That is a lot of money compared to a life sentence, which is only around $100,000, a little over. I would much rather spend $100,000 keeping them in prison than spending millions for a one-time thing. The death penalty has many issues. Some disagree and think that criminals should, get the same treatment that they did. However, there are more details into these reasons making it wrong. The death row should no longer be allowed. And then here is my audience once again.